My son looked me in the eye and said, "Mom, you need to move out. Sophia's family needs this room more than you do." That was the moment my entire world collapsed. The same day my husband shoved divorce papers across the table, my son was pushing me out of his home. They thought I was a burden, someone to be discarded after a lifetime of sacrifice. What they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this day for years, and every brick of the house they cherished was still in my name. My name is Margaret. I'm 67 years old, and I never imagined I would spend the final stretch of my life feeling like a guest in the very family I devoted everything to building. Once I was a nurse, the kind of woman who rushed through double shifts, who held strangers' hands as they took their last breaths, and who still came home to prepare dinner for her husband and help her son with his homework. My entire youth was spent in service, at the hospital, at home, in the quiet corners of my own dreams. Those dreams were always pushed aside so Thomas, my husband, could climb the ladder of his career, and Daniel, our only son, could have every opportunity money and sacrifice could buy. When I retired, I thought it would finally be time to rest, maybe even to enjoy the fruits of decades of selflessness. But retirement was not peace. It was relocation. I was asked, gently at first, then more firmly, to move into Daniel's house. The suggestion was framed as love. "It will be good for you, Mom. We'll be closer. You won't be alone." But once I settled into their home, it didn't feel like closeness. It felt like shrinking. The room I was given was small, tucked away near the back of the house, and Sophia, my daughter-in-law, was quick to remind me that storage is tight and that I should be mindful of what I brought into their space. Still, I told myself it was fine. I had a little garden patch outside to tend, a chair by the window where I could knit or read, and when my grandson was born, I found new purpose. I taught him to hold a crayon, to sound out letters, to say please and thank you. Those small moments gave me joy, even as the undercurrent of displacement grew stronger. Thomas, my husband of more than 40 years, visited less and less. He had business trips, or so he claimed, though I had begun to notice how detached he was, how little he asked about me or about Daniel. Once he would kiss my cheek before leaving. Now his eyes slid past me, as if I were no longer part of the equation. Daniel himself, my sweet boy who once clung to my hand on the first day of school, had grown into a man too busy for conversations. He worked in IT long hours at the office, and when he came home, he gave most of his attention to Sophia and their child. I told myself that was natural. Sons grow, sons build families. A mother should be happy to see her child thrive, but happiness felt hollow when every word I spoke seemed like an intrusion. Sophia, outwardly, was all smiles. She called me Mom in public, poured me a cup of tea when guests were around, and spoke about me like I was a cherished elder. But in the silence of the house, her tone shifted. She rearranged my belongings without asking, moved my chair from the window because it blocked the light, and replaced my floral curtains with the sleek gray ones she liked. "It's just decor, Mom," she would say, but the message was clear. My presence was temporary, tolerated rather than embraced. I remembered one night standing in the kitchen while she was stacking groceries into cabinets. She paused, glanced at the small box of herbal tea I had placed on the shelf, and moved it aside. "We're short on space. Maybe you could keep your personal things in your room." The way she said personal things stung, as if I were smuggling in something shameful instead of a simple box of chamomile. I wanted to turn to Daniel to tell him how much these small slights hurt, but when I tried, he sighed and said, "Mom, please, don't make this bigger than it is. The house is small. Sophia's just trying to organize. Try to be patient." His words were not cruel, but they carried the weight of dismissal. My sacrifices. The nights I stayed awake when he was sick, the hours I worked to pay for his tuition, the meals I cooked from scraps, collapsed into a single request: be patient. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how a mother's worth could shrink so quickly. It wasn't one grand betrayal. It was the steady erosion of belonging, the daily reminders that I did not quite fit. And yet I said nothing. I swallowed the sting, told myself it was better not to stir conflict. But the silence I chose was the very thing that allowed them to forget the cost of their comfort. I tried to hold on to the good moments, the smile of my grandson when he ran into my arms, the times Daniel absent-mindedly thanked me for watching him, the rare mornings when Sophia's smile almost felt genuine. Those moments were the pauses in the storm, the reasons I convinced myself I still mattered. But beneath them ran an undeniable current. I was an outsider in my own family. And though I didn't know it yet, that quiet feeling of being just a guest was about to become a brutal truth, one that would shatter everything I thought I still had. The date was marked on my calendar in careful handwriting, our 42nd wedding anniversary. I had been planning a small dinner for weeks, imagining a warm evening where the table would glow with candlelight, my grandson would giggle over cake, and Thomas might, just for a moment, look at me the way he used to. I roasted chicken the way he liked it, baked bread from scratch, and arranged flowers from my garden in a simple vase. It wasn't grand, but it was love, distilled into food and fragrance. When the evening came, the house was quiet. I waited, smoothing the tablecloth again and again. Sophia was upstairs, her voice muffled behind a closed door, and Daniel promised he would be home soon. I told myself Thomas was only late because of traffic. But when he finally walked in, there was no warmth, no smile. He set down his briefcase, looked at me with eyes so flat they seemed carved from stone, and slid an envelope across the table. "Margaret," he said, his tone almost casual, "I think it's time we end this. I've been seeing someone for years. She makes me happy in ways you don't anymore." I felt the air leave my lungs. The envelope sat on the table between us, a quiet weapon. Inside were divorce papers already signed on his part. My hands trembled as I picked them up, the words swimming before my eyes. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure, as though decades of shared life could be condensed into legal language and a single cold signature. Before I could even process the blow, Daniel appeared in the doorway. His face was tense, almost apologetic, but his words were sharp. "Mom, we need to talk. Sophia's parents are coming to stay for a while. They need space. You should probably move out of the room. It's only fair." I stared at him, my son, the boy I once carried through sleepless nights, the man I thought would stand beside me when the world turned cruel. His voice was steady, almost rehearsed. He didn't look me in the eyes for long. "You can manage, right? Maybe use the smaller room or find something else. It'll only be temporary." Temporary. The word sliced deeper than the divorce papers. I was no longer a wife, and now I was no longer even a mother with a place in her child's home. I was a burden, an afterthought, an inconvenience to be shifted aside so others could be comfortable. That night, I sat in the kitchen alone. The food I had prepared for celebration went untouched. The candles burned down to waxy stubs. The house echoed with silence, except for the sound of my own breathing, shallow and uneven. 2 betrayals in one night. Husband and son, the pillars of my existence, both pushing me into the shadows. I tried to gather myself, but memories crashed against me like waves. Nights of staying awake by Daniel's bedside when he had the flu. Years of ironing Thomas's shirts, saving every extra dollar so he could start his business. Countless times I put myself last so they could thrive. And now it all felt worthless, as if my sacrifices had been invisible all along. My emotions churned like a storm. At first, disbelief, this couldn't be real. Then came anger, a hot flush that made my hands shake. How dare they discard me? How dare they treat me as though I were nothing? But just as quickly, the anger ebbed into sorrow. I remembered Daniel as a boy, with soft hair and wide eyes clutching my hand on the way to school. I remembered the way Thomas once looked at me with pride, telling me we'd built a life together no one could tear down. Now both of them had done the tearing. In my desperation, I called Daniel's phone. I needed him to take back the words, to reassure me this was a misunderstanding, a mistake spoken in haste. He answered, his voice low. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it already is. You have to understand. Sophia's family needs this. We can't keep everyone happy if you don't compromise." I swallowed, forcing my voice steady. "And what about me, Daniel? Where do I belong in this house? In your life?" Silence stretched, and then he said softly, almost mechanically, "You'll always be my mom, but things are different now. You need to accept that." The line went dead. I pressed the phone to my chest and felt the sting of tears, not because I might lose a roof over my head, not because of the papers Thomas had left on the table. I wept because I realized my place in their hearts had been quietly dismantled, brick by brick, until nothing remained. I sat there until the clock struck midnight, the house dark around me. I thought of the years of silence I had chosen, the times I swallowed my hurt to keep the peace, and I wondered if my quiet obedience had taught them to believe I could be discarded without consequence. I didn't know then, but that night would be the turning point of my life. The night when everything I thought I was, wife, mother, anchor of a family, crumbled. And in the ruins, I felt the faint, painful stirrings of something I hadn't known in years, the need to fight for myself. I sat frozen in that kitchen, staring at the divorce papers, staring at the empty chair my son once filled as a boy. My chest tightened with a thought I couldn't shake. Maybe my silence, my patience, my endless sacrifices had been the very reason they believed I was disposable. The morning after the anniversary that had turned into a battlefield, I wandered through the house in a daze. The silence pressed down on me like a weight, but beneath the numbness was an unease I couldn't shake. Something told me that what I had seen, the divorce papers, Daniel's request, was only the surface of a deeper, darker truth. I began sorting through an old box of files I had kept tucked away for years. Inside were documents from when Thomas and I first bought the house, bank records from decades ago, even my retirement savings account. My breath caught when I realized most of the property, including the very house I now felt unwanted in, was still legally under my name. The deed bore my signature, not Thomas's, not Daniel's. Even the joint account Thomas and I once shared still listed me as the primary holder. For a moment, I felt a flicker of power, but it was quickly swallowed by dread. If they were so determined to push me out, what else had they planned? That evening, I overheard voices drifting from the living room. Sophia's tone was sharp, hushed, but urgent. "Just give it time," she told her mother over the phone. "Once she agrees to move out, the house will be as good as ours. Daniel won't stop me. He knows where his loyalties belong." My stomach turned to ice. I pressed my ear closer, straining to catch every word. Her mother's laughter was faint but cutting. "Good girl, secure the foundation first. With the house, everything else will follow." Sophia lowered her voice, but the venom in her words was clear. "She's old. She'll give in. She doesn't have the fight left in her." I pulled back from the door, trembling. Daniel was sitting right there, silent. He didn't argue, didn't defend me, didn't even shift uncomfortably. His silence was worse than cruelty. It was consent. I retreated to my room, my heart pounding. That was the moment it struck me with brutal clarity. They didn't just want me out of the house, they wanted me erased. My existence, my history, my sacrifices, all wiped clean so they could claim the life I had built. For days after, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I pored over more documents tracing financial trails that told stories more damning than words. That's when I saw it. Thomas had been quietly moving funds out of our accounts for years, transferring money to a woman whose name appeared again and again. At first I didn't believe it. Then I remembered the business trips, the late nights, the way his eyes never lingered on me anymore. The betrayal deepened, not just emotional, but financial. He had been dismantling our life piece by piece, hiding it in plain sight. The next revelation came like a knife twist. I discovered emails Sophia had printed and left on the desk. They detailed plans to use the house as collateral for a business venture with her family. They weren't just eager to occupy space, they intended to cash in on everything I had. The words on the page blurred as my hands shook. Once the property is cleared, we can secure the loan. It's the perfect start. My chest tightened as realization dawned. Sophia's ambition, Thomas's betrayal, Daniel's silence. It was all intertwined. They saw me not as a mother, a wife, or even a human being with worth, but as an obstacle standing between them and their desires. The deepest cut came when I confronted Daniel indirectly. I asked him, "Do you know what Sophia and her family are planning with this house?" He hesitated, his eyes flickering with something I had not seen in years. Fear. Then he whispered, "Mom, I know, but please don't make me choose. I can't lose her. You'll always be my mom, but I can't risk my marriage." It was then the last piece of my heart broke. My son knew. He had known all along, and instead of standing by me, he chose silence. He chose her. I sat alone that night staring at the evidence I had collected. Divorce papers from Thomas, bank transfers to his mistress, Sophia's letters detailing her schemes, Daniel's words still echoing in my ears. Everything was clear now, but as tears streamed down my face, something hardened inside me. I realized that if I stayed silent again, if I swallowed this pain like I had swallowed so many others, I would lose everything, my dignity, my home, my future. I had spent a lifetime being the quiet supporter, the invisible backbone, but now invisibility had become the very weapon they wielded against me. I wiped my tears, folded the documents neatly and placed them in a folder. My voice, trembling but resolute, whispered into the dark, "No more. This time, I will not be erased. This time, I will write the ending." And with that, the fear that had consumed me began to shift. For the first time in years, I felt not powerless but prepared. I thought I had reached the bottom of despair, but I was wrong. What I uncovered next cut deeper than any betrayal I had ever imagined. For weeks, I pieced together scraps of information, documents, overheard conversations, quiet observations. Each fragment sharpened the picture of what my life had truly been reduced to. A wife discarded, a mother dismissed, an inconvenience plotted against. The truth was no longer blurry. It was as sharp as broken glass. Thomas had betrayed me in every way that mattered. His affair was not new. It had been carefully nurtured for years. The money he siphoned away, the distant business trips, the sudden disinterest in family gatherings, it all made sense now. Sophia's greed was not spontaneous either. Her ambition had been patiently cultivated, waiting for the day she could claim everything I had spent a lifetime building. And Daniel, my Daniel, was not blind. He was simply too weak to fight for me, too afraid of losing his wife to protect the woman who had once given him everything. But the cruelest blow was still waiting. One afternoon, when I finally summoned the courage to confront the woman Thomas had been funneling money to, I saw her face, and my world collapsed all over again. It was Claire, my closest friend from nursing school, the woman I had once trusted with my secrets, who had sat beside me during nights on call, who held my hand when Daniel was born. She looked at me with a smugness I had never seen before. "I didn't expect you to find out like this, Margaret," she said, her voice soft but dripping with triumph. "Thomas deserves to be happy. You've held him back for too long." My body went cold, but I refused to let her see me break. "Held him back?" I whispered. I built his life. I carried him on my back for 40 years. She smiled, cruel and unflinching, and now it's my turn. I walked away before the sobs could escape me. It was not only betrayal, it was annihilation. Husband, son, friend, every person I had poured love into had turned my devotion into a weapon against me. That night, alone in my room, I pressed a trembling hand to my chest. Pain welled so strongly I thought my heart might stop. But beneath the sorrow was a spark, a tiny, defiant flame. If they had plotted for years, if they thought I would surrender quietly, they had underestimated me. I whispered into the silence, I know now, and I will not be erased. I cannot continue as the mother who lingers in the background, as the wife discarded like old linen. I will not be the woman who fades into nothing. The next morning, I began to gather everything. I pulled out the house deed, retirement accounts, savings certificates, the will I had written years ago and never updated. Piece by piece, I built a fortress of proof. Every signature, every line of ownership bore my name. This was my shield, my weapon, the truth no one could deny. But I knew evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed allies, guidance. I visited a lawyer downtown, a woman younger than Daniel with sharp eyes and a steady voice. I slid the folder across the desk. I need to know how much power I have left. She flipped through the papers, nodding slowly. Mrs. Hartwell, everything here suggests you are still the primary owner. Legally, you're in control. If they try to force you out, they have no claim, but you must be careful. They won't take this kindly. Her words were both terrifying and empowering. For the first time in years, I felt something close to strength, a reminder that my life had not been entirely stolen, that there were still pieces I could claim. That evening, I walked to the riverbank near our home. The water shimmered under the setting sun, and I found myself remembering Daniel as a child. I saw him chasing dragonflies, laughing so freely it hurt my chest. I remembered holding his small hand, promising him he would always have me no matter what. Tears blurred the image, and I wondered if that boy still existed somewhere inside the man who now betrayed me with silence. The memory broke me, but it also steeled me. I realized I wasn't fighting only for survival. I was fighting for the years I had given away, for the dignity I still deserved, for the woman I once was and refused to let them bury. I turned back toward the house, clutching the folder of evidence. My steps were slow but steady. They still thought of me as the quiet mother, the fragile wife, the woman too meek to resist, but they didn't know the truth yet. I whispered to myself, the words burning in my throat, I am ready, and when the time comes, they will see I am no longer the silent woman they thought they could destroy. The dinner had been Sophia's idea. She called it a family gathering, but I knew what it was meant to be, her coronation. The night when she would finally secure her family's hold on everything I had built. The table was set extravagantly with crystal glasses and polished silver. She moved about the dining room with confidence, her smile just a little too wide, her voice pitched a little too high. Thomas sat in his chair, composed, as though none of this involved him, as though he were already living another life. Daniel fidgeted beside him, silent but restless, caught between guilt and loyalty. I sat at the far end of the table, my folder of documents hidden in plain sight by my side. The smell of roasted meat and garlic bread filled the air, but I could taste nothing but the metallic edge of anticipation. I kept my lips pressed shut, letting them speak, letting them reveal themselves without interference. Sophia was the first to strike. She raised her glass and said, "This dinner is about the future, about security for our family." Her eyes flicked toward me for the briefest second, sharp and dismissive. Then she looked at Daniel and added, "We've been talking, and it's time we think about the house as more than just a place to live. It's an asset, a foundation." Daniel swallowed hard, but he didn't speak. His silence was the echo of every silence before, a wall between us that had grown thicker with time. Thomas leaned back, expression smooth, as though none of this were new to him. His hands were folded neatly, his eyes fixed on the glass of wine before him. He didn't have to say anything. His approval was in the stillness of his face. I let them talk. Sophia went on about investments, about opportunities, about the importance of planning ahead. Her words were dressed in the language of responsibility, but beneath them beat the drum of greed. Daniel finally nodded, muttering, "It makes sense," as though he were convincing himself as much as anyone else. That was the moment I chose to move. Slowly, deliberately, I set my fork down and reached for the folder by my side. I placed it on the table with a sound that cut through their conversation like a knife. All eyes turned to me. Without a word, I opened it and spread the papers across the table. The deed to the house, the bank accounts, the partnership agreements. Every page bore my name in ink that could not be erased. "This," I said, my voice calm but resonant, "is the truth. This house is mine. These accounts are mine. Even your company, Thomas. It began with my contributions, my savings. Without me, there would have been no start, no success. You built your empire on the back of my sacrifice." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, the distant hum of the refrigerator, and beneath it all, my own heartbeat, steady and loud. For the first time in years, it was not fear that I felt, but power. Sophia's face drained of color. Her lips parted, but no words came. She reached for the documents as if to disprove them, but her hands trembled too much to hold steady. Thomas's composure cracked, his face flushing red. He slammed a fist against the table. "How dare you go behind my back like this?" I met his rage with stillness. "Behind your back? This was always mine. You were the one who hid, who lied, who took. You cannot erase my name from what I built." Daniel sat frozen, eyes wide, darting between me and the papers. "Mom, I didn't know," he began, but his voice faltered when he realized I would not protect him from the truth anymore. I stood slowly, gathering my strength. "If I must leave this house, then so must all of you. Because it is not your foundation, it is not your asset, it is not your inheritance, it is mine." The words hung heavy in the air. Sophia crumpled into her chair, her ambition collapsing under the weight of reality. Thomas seethed, his authority shattered by a truth he could no longer control. Daniel's shoulders sagged, the burden of his silence finally crushing him. And then I delivered the final blow. "I've made my decision. The house will be sold. None of you will live here again. If you wanted me gone, then you shall have it, but not on your terms, on mine." Sophia gasped audibly. Thomas cursed under his breath, and Daniel buried his face in his hands. The empire they had imagined, the life they thought they had secured, crumbled in a single evening. I felt no triumph, only release. My voice softened, but it did not shake. I have spent too many years being quiet, being patient, being invisible. That ends tonight. For the first time in decades, I felt free, not safe, not certain of tomorrow, but free. And in the thick, suffocating silence that followed, I heard the only sound that mattered, the steady, defiant beat of my own heart. The weeks that followed the dinner were a blur of signatures, legal consultations, and cold silence within the house. I moved with deliberate calm, though inside, my emotions were a storm. I sold the house they thought would anchor their future. I signed the documents without hesitation, knowing it was my last act of authority in the place where I had once been reduced to a guest. When the sale was complete, the aftermath was swift. By law, Thomas was entitled to nothing beyond what the court deemed fair, but because he had siphoned assets to his mistress, his claims were weak. He left with empty hands and a face twisted in bitterness. For years, he had drained me of love, loyalty, and money, and now he was left with nothing. Sophia's dream shattered overnight. Without the house, there was no collateral for her business, no foundation for her ambition. Her voice, once sharp with control, turned into whispers of panic. I heard her pleading with Daniel, demanding he fix what was broken, but there was no fixing it. Daniel himself was crumbling. His silence, his refusal to defend me, had cost him more than he could bear. He looked at me one last time as I packed my things, his eyes hollow, as though he had finally realized what he had lost. Not the house, not the money, but me, his mother. I left without looking back. The new house I bought was small, perched by the sea, with a garden just big enough for flowers and herbs. The air smelled of salt and freedom. For the first time in years, I could hear myself think without the weight of disapproval or betrayal pressing against my chest. I spent mornings walking along the shore, afternoons with soil on my hands, and evenings writing in a journal that would someday become my memoir. Each word I wrote stitched together the torn fabric of my soul. One evening, I sat on the porch, watching the horizon burn orange and gold as the sun sank into the water. A soft breeze touched my face, and I realized I was smiling, not because everything had been restored, but because I had survived the storm. My journey had not left me unscarred, but it had left me free. Looking back, I saw the path clearly. My life had been a story of sacrifice and silence, followed by betrayal so sharp it nearly ended me. But in that ending, I had found a new beginning. I had learned that silence, when it comes from fear, is a prison. But silence, when it comes from strength, is liberation. I speak now not only for myself, but for every woman who has been told her worth is conditional, who has been made to feel like a burden after years of giving. Never underestimate the quiet strength of a mother, for beneath that silence can lie a storm, and beneath that storm can lie a resolve that will not be broken. To those listening, I say this: cherish your parents. Honor the ones who raised you, who sacrificed for you, who stood between you and the world's cruelties. Do not wait until it is too late to see the love that held you up. For once it is gone, no amount of regret can rebuild it. One morning, as I was tending the garden by my new home, a letter arrived. It was written in a child's uneven scrawl, and my heart tightened as I recognized the handwriting. It was from my grandson. "Grandma," it read, "I don't care what they say. I still need you. I still love you. Please don't forget me." Tears blurred the page as I held it to my chest. The world had taken much from me, but not everything. The bond between a grandmother and a child, innocent and untainted by greed, still remained. It was a flicker of light in the ruins, proof that love, even fractured love, could endure. I lifted my eyes to the sea, whispering to myself, maybe families are never perfect. Maybe they break. But if there is even one spark of love left, perhaps it can still save us. The wind carried my words away, mingling them with the crash of the waves. And for the first time in a long while, I felt not only free but hopeful.